Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Standing in Our Truth. I'm TJ, and of course, we have the lovely Richa here. And today we're back with a topic that, of course, has come up for the both of us pretty frequently in the last couple of years. And we always want to talk about what's personally affecting us and how we're kind of moving through it. I know right now I'm 8 months pregnant, and my mind is so scattered and all over the place. And so we wanted to bring this topic, which can be heavy at times, but of generational trauma or trauma that was passed down through our lineages. And we've both talked about our upbringings and how they're quite similar, but also so different. And we wanted to share our experience on how the trauma from our past, from our ancestors has affected us today and how we are healing through it and how it shows up in our relationships today. But I am so excited to see you. It's been a month since I've seen you in person. You look beautiful as ever. How are you doing, sis?
Oh my gosh, I am too. I'm so happy to see you. It's your birthday month, and I hated not being able to be with you there in person on your birthday, but I know it was a special one, and you are glowing, and you're only looking younger and aging like fine wine, sis. So yes, this time together always makes my heart smile. What you do on your birthday?
We went to go see a comedy show. It's our thing now. We've just been laughing like on the ground, rolling, whatever it is we're doing. And we saw Kevin Hart, and then we saw Aziz Ansari, and it's just been a fun little date night. We're trying to spend as much quality time together before the baby arrives in about a month. Date nights, all of it. We're engaging in it, and we're having just a ball together. It's like we're dating all over again. It's actually really, really fun.
I love it. It's so special, like the few weeks now that you guys have before baby Ziva comes along. It's so special, and that quality time is so important. And so I'm really glad we ditched our podcast recording last week because I would much rather have you laughing at Aziz Ansari and Kevin Hart than me when I mess up on here. So thanks, Cam, for coordinating all of that. And I'm so glad it was fun. And happy birthday from me. And I know all of our listeners are like getting to know you and so happy for these next steps for you. So I think it's a really special time, and the whole topic of generational trauma comes up so like just right in time for these like next few weeks for you, because you're thinking about the baby and like everything that you do, how it affects the baby, and it's just come up with us a lot in our relationships and in every form. So it will again probably wrap up our previous topics really well, and maybe have people thinking a little bit about angles where we don't even know that we're acting a certain way due to generations before us, which is such a mindful mindset. And I know I wasn't thinking like this until I was in the field and had friends like you and like people who are like really looking back at our pasts. And so it's that's where all the importance lies, right? Like what made us the way we are, and we just keep talking about this, and it's just such a simple concept if we look at it at the simplest level possible. It's like intergenerational trauma or generational trauma, which are basically the same thing. It's exposure to adverse events, right? But it doesn't have to be like these catastrophic things like 9/11, which you hear a lot about in studies, and like the Civil War and how our grandparents were affected. It could be just simply our parents' attachment styles and how we like end up carrying the same traits and end up carrying that into our relationships. And so I did some thinking about this before we spoke today, like literally a few minutes. I was like, how does it show up in my life? But I wanted to hear from you, like your input on like what it is. And it's such a hot topic. Like, how do you see it playing in today's world?
Yeah, you so beautifully articulated how generational trauma can affect you and what events may have taken place in the past that could be affecting you today. Generational trauma or intergenerational trauma is super new for me. We always talk about childhood trauma and we've talked about attachment styles, and I absolutely adore that all of our topics blend together and we end up with our next topic because it's all so related, right? We're evolving beings and some of these things are coming up repeatedly. For me, it was a yearning to learn more about my parents' upbringing. I've done a lot of therapy work around acknowledging and accepting that my parents did the best that they could, but also putting myself in their shoes, right? Like, what did they have to go through as a child? What did their parents have to go through? And so this generational trauma is often passed down through our gene code, and epigenetics is the study of that. And so, what my parents had gone through in their early childhood, maybe the immigration to America, or their parents through the partition in India, is definitely imprinted in me. And it's not all bad, right? There's resiliency, there's a lot of courage that they had to go through. But some of the feelings that I believe have been passed down to me are these fearful, stuck emotions that I have. And they sometimes feel physically stale. And I have learned now to want and to be curious about my parents' upbringing, about what it was like for my grandparents. And what we talk a lot about in the therapy world is acknowledging those stories, right? Like, these are hidden stories, hidden secrets. Sometimes our parents, and I know my siblings are going to laugh if they're listening, they try to hide these secrets from us, or like, not even secrets, they won't tell the full complete truth because they're afraid it may affect us. But little do they know that it was passed down in my father's DNA when I was born. Like, it was passed down from my mother's DNA. And so these things are within me, and now I'm learning how to work through them. And so the curiosity that's been coming up for me is wanting to learn more about, what did my grandparents have to go through? What were the adverse events that happened? What did they do to get through it? I know for a fact that I have such strong faith in God and the universe today because my grandmother was that. Like, every time she was faced with, a fearful event, what was happening between Pakistan and India at the time that she was raising her children, was that she relied on God and her faith. And that is the resiliency I'm talking about. So, not all of this is bad. Not all of this trauma is, like, really affecting me to the point where, like, I'm afraid it's going to get passed down to my daughter. It's more of, I'm feeling that stuckness, or just like this plateau, because I haven't acknowledged it. And I love that we're talking about it, because it's really opening up the conversation of, let's get curious with it. Let's ask questions without expectations, without emotion attached to it. Let's talk to our family members and our ancestors about, like, what it was like for them. And it's cool because we get to pass that history down. I don't want it to get lost either, lost
Mhm.
in translation, because God knows I'm not going to teach my child how to read and write Punjabi. I mean, I may, but, like, some of these things I want to be able to tell her when she's of age. How about
Totally.
this? How is it showing up for you?
Well, it took a lot of thinking before this to kind of see how it showed up in my life personally, right? Because we just think in the bigger studies that are coming out, they're really looking at, like, okay, let's see how the babies that were born from mothers who survived 9/11, like, how are they different? Did they have more of a tendency to suffer from PTSD? Is their personality a little bit more anxious? And yeah, it showed a lot of that. So, when we think about that, like, we, didn't experience such experiences that were, that traumatic that people think of as the quote unquote large traumas, the big T's. So I had to look at the little T's a little bit and kind of dive back, just like you did with, my parents were part of the partition as well. And when they separated, from Multan, they talk about, like, how they had to hide in their house and, like, black out everything. And that, my mom lived by the Taj Mahal, and they had to, like, darken it at night. I don't know. I just hear these stories, and in my mind I just see, like, an image of the Taj Mahal just shading down so no one can attack it. And it's like, whoa, that's scary as a kid. But as I thought about that, I thought about my mother in Agra. That's where she was brought up. And I started thinking a little deeper. I was like, okay, she was born, in Patna, which is Bihar, but then moved to Agra. And then her grandmother raised her. Her grandmother, as I hear, and I knew her when I was a kid, but not very long. But so my great grandmother was very, as they would call it, clean, organized. She would keep the house perfect. She kept my mom super, like, in new clothing every single day, super spoiled, like, all these things. And my mom mentioned to me that her parents didn't really have time to take care of her because my nanny was doing her PhD, etc. And I think back and I'm like, wait a second. So we called her Bobby G, but I was like, so you were raised by someone who had some pretty severe OCD, right, mom? And she's like, no, no, it was just, they don't acknowledge that part. They don't want it to look bad. And I think we're a little bit more comfortable talking about like these things now and giving them a name. I know again people don't like titles, but I heard about that story and I saw it passed down to me in a way that I didn't show up with major OCD in a way that she did or my great grandmother did, but it showed up for me in my body. I don't like to blame anyone for my issues, but if I really step back and kind of see like what happened before me, what happened to my mom, what happened to her mom and her grandmother, it's like, holy moly, we have so much in common. How does that happen? Of course, there's the genetic piece and that's all being rolled down, but it's really those characteristics and those traits that someone just carries on from the person who raised them, and it doesn't have to be severely traumatic. I'm pretty sure my mom loved her beautiful house and her new outfits every day, but the way it showed up for me was different because I'm not in Agra. I'm in the United States in a brand new country, not being born here, and it's showing up differently for me. So that was the example that I could really target in my life, that I've seen it. And I got a chance to talk to my husband before this episode too. And I was like, hey, is it okay if I talk a little bit, about that thing we don't like to talk about, which is addiction? And, he's like, that's fine. It's like he's at a place where he's kind of thinking about it too. And we have a son and we got to think about like what we want passed down. And so he brought up like his dad drinks, his granddad drinks, and it wasn't frowned upon at all. It was completely fine. Even if it wasn't affecting people in a positive way, it's just what they did and it was fine and it just happened. And so, when it came to us, I think that's where I know it stops and I don't want it carried down just because I've seen some of the traumatic effects. But those are two examples in my life I wanted to share. And I think I really relate to your, how you bring up what our parents went through when there was the partitions and those major events and how it trickled down. So really
Yeah,
interesting.
I'm so proud, like, to be able to live and feel privileged that we can share it so openly because our parents and our ancestors didn't have the outlets that we have. And, like, they'll listen to this and they'll be like, probably feel so proud of us, right? That we're openly sharing this stuff. I feel so much love for like my ancestors right now. And I also think it's because I'm pregnant, but I love that you bring up the mental health portion of it, like the OCD, the addiction, mental health disorders. Those are absolutely passed down through our gene code. And it's not that our ancestors or our parents didn't try their own mechanisms of healing and they didn't try to correct some of that for themselves. They just may have not had the tools, but it's not until we start working on it do we know how ingrained it is in our, I keep saying, in our gene code. Like this stuff is passed down, and like how do we break that generational trauma? And that's what I'm so excited to talk about because we can proudly own it and also move through it. But going back to the mental health traumas that our ancestors and generations before that have gone through, like I do believe addiction is passed down. I mean, they say it's genetic and it can be expressed in like alternate generations and it skips a generation. I mean, I don't know how much of that is true, but I do know there were forms of alcoholism and depression and anxiety and other psychiatric disorders present in my family members. It's just the sad truth, Richa, is that we don't talk about it, right? And like even if I hear like glimpses of stories from my dad and my mom, and more so my cousins who are older and who spent more time with my grandparents. Our uncle had this issue, or our aunt had this issue, and no shame on them, right? They must have felt so much shame because, of course, they didn't talk about it, right? The stigma, the guilt that it brought them, and the shame that it brought their family. But the fact that we're not talking about it openly is hurting the next generations. And I think that's where we, as partners in this podcast, wanted to bring this to our audience, not to say you have generational trauma or your trauma is larger or bigger than other people's traumas or what Richa and I's ancestors went through was different from yours. It's more so of, again, I come back to the curiosity. Like if you're feeling some sort of grief or sadness or heaviness around, things that have happened in your past, it may be time or maybe helpful for you to explore some of those stories and secrets that haven't been told. And I know that as I've gotten older, my relationship with my parents has gotten better. I mean, I've definitely had to work on it. I know I have to check my motives, like I say all the time, see that I'm coming from a loving place and have these open, compassionate conversations and just ask open ended questions to my family members of what did happen to that one uncle that never got married and then died at a young age? Like, was there some, family medical condition? Was there some mental health conditions that were going on? Was he shamed for something? And it's not until we start asking those questions do these stories start coming out of the closet, right? And I know that sometimes I feel that family members don't think that we can handle those stories, or that like it's a burden to us, like we don't need to know, it's not none of our worries, it's in the past. But I think that's the part of carrying the trauma, is that we're not talking about it. And so to have these conversations like you had with your husband, and for him to start getting like question, yeah, my father drank, my grandfather drank, same on my side of the family. Like I have, you know family members, dad, grandparents that drank. I have a grandfather that was like very military, like 5 o'clock, he'd have his glass of scotch, but he never crossed that invisible line of addiction. But some of those genes were expressed from somewhere. And so now it's time for me to find out where it came from, acknowledge it, and talk about it with a therapist with like, professional help, and see how I can openly, vulnerably, and transparently share that with my daughter. Because I think it's important. And I think you and I laugh because our parents will start telling us like part of the truth and
Yep.
like not want to share everything.
Yep.
Part of me wants to just be like, we can handle it. We're adults, like we're parents now, but we also have to respect them. And maybe it brings up the trauma back for them. Like maybe it re-triggers them. Yeah, it's a tricky topic to talk about because not everyone wants to acknowledge that it's part of their history.
Totally. I feel like you hit the nail with the hammer when you talk about our parents not wanting to give us the whole truth because they're trying to protect our family and the legacy. And it's kind of, I feel like we walk that like that careful little boundary when we're talking about our families. And that's why we have to do a little bit of thinking before we do some of the sharing on this show. But on this podcast, but I feel like it's so important to get the context, right? Like the background until we do any problem solving in our own lives. And so I really, before sharing today, I was like, I'm a little bit afraid of, talking about my mother and some of her issues, which, she doesn't really consider issues, and maybe nobody in our family does. But I definitely saw it as something that wasn't normal as I grew older, too much of the OCD and all that stuff. And when I started talking to her a little bit as I got older, I realized that, she gave me some little tidbits too, that she was probably hiding, like you said, with your parents. And I found out that my great grandfather, who also raised her, he was an alcoholic until she kind of was born. And then she had, when she was born, he vowed to never drink again. And I realized, whoa, is that why you're such a Nazi about not drinking? Like, you can actually figure out how certain traits that your family, things that your family doesn't do, where they came from. Like someone back in the day, like over 100 years ago, figured out that it was traumatizing, and maybe that's how they dealt with the trauma of addiction, was with OCD. And I did some, like, it was like a big epiphany moment in my head, like, whoa, that's why you're this way. That's why you probably handled your guardians at the time, and you grew up in a way that you could handle it, and you made some changes, although it affected you in a negative way. And of course, genetically and with character traits, it got passed down. But one of the quotes that helps me kind of understand like how we look at family dynamics and how we are and how to not judge them is by one of the quotes by Resma Menakem, who talks about like racial trauma, right? He's one of the senior fellows at the Meadows, and that's why I know of him. I didn't really before, but when I started reading his work, he said trauma decontextualized in a person looks like personality. trauma decontextualized in a family can look like family traits, and trauma decontextualized in a people can look like culture. And until we understand these pieces, we're just that's why we're judging until we understand it. So I really started understanding the importance of like knowing where it came from, because otherwise we're gonna, we'll be like, wow, your grandfather was not a very good guy, or your mom, like, did she not love you? No, we have to go back and see like what the steps were, like what caused these things, and then just like you said, it's taking accountability for how we are and changing it. So yeah, what a domino effect. It's powerful.
Yeah. And it's our responsibility to peel back the layers. And like the quote you just said about decontextualizing, like we kind of have to break it down, and we have to be that generation that's willing to do it. And I'm not saying that my father and my mother aren't willing to work on whatever traumas they went through. I'm saying it's if we want to break the cycles of whatever we're going through, it's our responsibility. And I always lean on the idea that like I'm responsible for my own happiness. And if I'm feeling that stuckness that I keep talking about, that energy, that life force energy that's draining me, I have to be the one that takes initiative to want to heal it and ask the questions, or maybe even talk to a professional about how to bring it up with our families, because it is so sensitive. And I don't want to downplay that at all, because we talk about this very often on this podcast. Our parents were in survival mode. Like they did the best that they could. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like coming here with kids, or and having kids and raising first generation Americans. Like it's already tough now. Like I'm scared to raise a daughter in this world right now, so I can't imagine what it was like 30 plus years ago. And so giving that compassionate grace to them, and just we both love our parents and our families so much, but just a disclaimer, like it can be very sensitive, because if they haven't done the work on themselves, which let's be honest, most of them haven't, they aren't willing to open up and share, and it may just bring up and re-trigger something from the past. And they have sacrificed so much for us to be here today and be able to speak so freely on a podcast like this. And so I wanted to bring it back full circle, and I've been talking about the life force energy that's within us, and like how to move through this and heal it. And our goal is always to share our own personal experiences, but also to give you tools to heal. And so I have definitely been practicing a lot of somatic work. As I may not know all the stories like clearly from the past, and I may never know them, but I know that I can acknowledge, accept that I feel a certain way, and move through that. And some of the things that I practice is like, I've talked about it already: breath work, meditation, talking to you, Richa, about, comparing our upbringings, and also just like radically accepting where we are in our lives and moving past that without shaming the past, if that makes sense. And so I've been really leaning on just like, I'm a big proponent of fitness and exercise, and like we have this energy within us that can feel like a lot. And so, we see kids, and we're always encouraging kids to go to the playground and get their energy out, go run around so you have a good night's sleep. It's the
Yeah.
same way with me. Like if I'm feeling worked up, I have to go for a nature walk and just at least acknowledge that like I'm feeling a certain way. And I know there's so many things that you do as well. You have definitely been an example for me on like seeking talk therapy, using recovery programming, and then also just leaning on your support system, like our siblings. And so, it looks so different for the both of us.
Yeah, totally. I think we both handle, the way we heal differently, and we do different things. Because you are the healthy gym junkie, like the fitness one, and I feel like I do. I've been doing a lot of reframing in my world, like a lot of connecting with the siblings on some of these pieces that we of our lives that they remember differently and that I remember differently. And of course there's a lot of basic CBT work that comes with that we I do that in my individual therapy, and it's shown to be helpful, like reframing the damaging stories that have been fed to us. So I don't know, this is not an example for me, but like someone could be told that they're worthless, or they could feel like that growing up. They could feel like my parents didn't have time for me, and this is how I feel. And then like working through those emotions and working through kind of how we break that cycle of happening, or us making that happen with our kids. And I brought up that example because it comes up a lot with, I think, people with low self-esteem. And I have, I've been working a lot on like self-love, and just like we talk about in every episode. But I know some of my issues came from somewhere back down the line where, I can't really target, where it started, but I know that I might have not felt as important as I should have, and it trickled down. So that whole piece, and then somatic work, of course, is great. The Body Keeps the Score. Everyone knows that book, and it's just so, it's a hot topic, when we talk about the way that trauma affects our body and how it shows up for us and how it shows up in different disorders. So I don't do a lot of like, I try to move my body, and I try to do that piece, but then art therapy is also a part of that. And I am one who doesn't make as much time as I should, but I really, like they say that art therapy like really comes out on paper, like these emotions that you're feeling, and how it can actually bring out deeper than before you. So those are some of the things I do. And just breaking the cycle has been our goal, right? We keep talking about it. Like, why are we doing this? What's the relevance of this podcast? Why are people going to find it important? But it's like studies suggest that children who like didn't have nurturing environments, they can still, move on with their kids, making them feel fully loved, fully nurtured, because it's all about that breaking the cycle piece. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. And it comes out at the end. It just came out by chance at the end of this episode, right? As we're talking about it. But that's literally become one of my goals as I walk through life. It's like, how did I act today? Did I like that? Do I want Armand to act like that? Do I want like this to be something that becomes a personality trait of our family? So it is that deeper thinking. And once we start noticing it, it becomes just like a way of life almost. So I'm with you, sister, on all these ways of growing and healing. And that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, and you have grown so much. I mean, I'm looking at you in awe right now because the way that you're sharing how you inventory at the end of the day, like, did I like how I acted here? Do I like how I show up, and the reframing of it, and then waking up the next day and starting all over again instead of carrying what happened yesterday with Armand or at work or your husband over to the next day. I mean, that is part of breaking the cycle. Like, yes, we have to do a lot of the work on finding out generational trauma and asking the questions, but like we also carry, the body keeps the score. We also carry yesterday's pains and struggles and challenges to the next day. And so for you to say like, let's reframe that, and how can we show up better tomorrow, those are just the little exercises and the little tools that we can use every single day. Every night before you go to bed, just inventory and ask yourself, did I show up in the best way possible? Like, is this who I want to be as a parent, as a friend, as a wife, as a partner? And the next morning, just saying, I'm ready to attack the day and in a new way. And so I love that you brought that up towards the end of our podcast, because that's exactly what it is. We break the cycle little by slow, and it starts with us today, and we're responsible for our happiness and how we show up in the world. And this podcast brings me so much joy, because every time we have a conversation, I'm just so excited to share it with the world, because we have healed through so much together, and even in this conversation, so much has come up for us to heal. So as we always say, here's to our healing, here's to our rising. Until the next episode.